from our guest, and Eno Reyes, if that's how you pronounce it.
Yes. Thank you. Appreciate it and excited to be here, everybody. It's nice to meet you all. My name's Eno. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Factory. And today I think that the thing that obviously everybody's here is they're here to talk about AI and they're talk about AI agents and what's happened in the last couple of months, but really that the last couple of years and the trend that we're seeing in how AI systems are evolving so rapidly. So super excited to chat a bit about it. I'm going to share my screen. Is that solid? So I can sort of have some material to talk as we go.
Yes, of course, of course. I will just make sure we're recording this. Yes, we're live and recording. And by the way, you wasn't here and trying to make the audience a little bit more active. I asked them what they expect from this session today. You
Hmm.
know, this is what TV hosts do when they need to do something with their time. They don't know, they start talking around. That's what I did. And I asked them what you want to focus on. So, of course, multi-agents, orchestration is the top key. Share lessons learned from working on Droid, basically multi-agent orchestration, another one. So I think that's what really brought people here to see what's built inside the coding agent and specifically factory, because everyone talking about swarm, everyone talking about agents and how they are working together, and of course, Anthropic latest feature agent teams uh, add add more value to that. Uh,
Totally.
go
Yeah, no, this is pretty much exactly what I think we want to talk about today. And I think that for folks who aren't familiar with Factory and Droid, we started actually two and a half, almost 3 years ago. And uh, back then the dominant paradigm was autocomplete, right? So it's sort of always funny to reflect for folks, just 2.5 short years ago, pretty much the only AI that people even thought about. I used to work at Hugging Face prior to Factory, right before we started Factory. Um, Everybody was thinking that AI was going to change coding via autocomplete 2.5 years ago. That was sort of the dominant paradigm. Um, I think people have obviously grown familiar with the concept of an agent over time, and even a year ago, at the beginning of the year, when Claude Code came out, when Codex came out, when a couple of different tooling. Even prior to Claude Code, so when Droid and Cognition's Devon came out in late 2024, people clearly understood that these systems were going to be powerful, but they did not really see any real world examples of impact that went stronger or beyond the autocomplete paradigm. So people mainly lived in the IDE, right? Um, Something has clearly changed, though. Probably you can pinpoint it at the end of December of last year. I think Andre Karpathy always sort of has a great job of stamping the end of an era or sort of like coining a new one. Obviously vibe coding, and I think that one of the things that he said is just this idea that even he has shifted the volume of code that he produces over time. And he's programming in English, right? And he's interacting and iterating with AI systems, and the vast majority of that work that's being done is the agent. Like how did we really get there, right? And I sort of already mentioned this, but it's 2 years, and you're moving so quickly towards this world where in early 2026, you can build complex software with hundreds of agent sessions over many days, right? And some systems that are either available in research preview from some companies. Like at Factory, we've got something that we've given our enterprise customers that lets the agent run for days entirely autonomously, right? Um, and so, you know, to put this in perspective, this is a huge jump in capabilities. And I think everybody here is sort of comfortable and familiar with the fact that this is a big change. But I want to start talking about like what actually concretely changed for people and what that mental model shift looked like, why things feel meaningfully different today. Um, I think people probably have heard that phrase, Ralph Wiggum's or Ralph Wiggum. It's a hilarious name for a technique. And really this was a funny moment because I think everybody left basically work and was on their winter break. And so anytime people have a little bit more free time, they start to play around. Um, this guy, Jeff Huntley, he took basically a bash loop, and the concept of an agent is effectively a while loop anyway, where an LLM says, I want to, act, observe, and then maybe I choose to continue this loop. Now you can wrap that inner agent loop in an outer loop. And so that simple bash loop that wraps the agent that basically just says, keep going is shockingly effective when it's paired with a frontier model. And so I think the insight here was that agents are not magic AI systems that can just one-shot everything you want to do. They're clumsy workers that really can only get there via repetition. And so if you sort of rely on that repetition, you feed the errors back, you let them retry, you force them to keep going, you're able to persist through a problem, and your odds of solving that problem to a high degree of quality, or more accurately, increase. And so this is actually like a pretty rough idea that basically says keep increasing the amount of inference time compute that you spend on the problem, and it will get solved better. And then people have made variations of this loop, but it's surprisingly effective with good models. And I think that this going viral as effectively like a simple bash loop, combined with a lot of the iterations that people building harnesses made to the harnesses themselves to enable people to hook this in. So you think about what does an agent even need to take advantage of Ralph Wiggum's? Why didn't this happen like a year ago? Well, one thing is from the community perspective, less people were using agents. Two, there's features like hooks and skills that sort of make an easy community modifiable version of this that can then be applied. And then you have standardization, right? So like Claude Code and Droid and Open Code support most of the standards like plugins, skills, MCP. Droid has full parity with Claude Code in terms of every setting config that you can imagine. And Open Code, I think, is fairly similar in that it's very hackable, right? And so combine all this together, and you have sort of a viral opportunity where someone ships something that all the people who are on winter break or whatever sort of see, and then they start communicating about, and then it's oddly effective, and they go, oh yeah, there's something here. Um, and really, there's an ecosystem of these sorts of systems that emerged over a very short period of time. I think Gastown is one that people are familiar with. And basically what this is a multi-agent workspace manager. It runs a bunch of different instances of agents, in particular Pi, typically using Claude. So Pi using like a Claude model. And these parallel agents have actual explicit coordination roles. So you sort of have like a mayor, and you have I think Gastown's probably like number one. It's really cool if you haven't seen it. I think its number one critique is that it creates like several specific roles. And so the complexity or the perceived complexity of this sort of tool is really high, right? It's sort of, I think the joke is that it's like Kubernetes for coding agents, where you've got the deacon and the mayor and the witness, and everyone is coordinating on top of each other. There's a lot of overhead in intra-agent communication. And we'll get back to that later, but actually this is sort of a something that you need to tweak and manage if you yourself are building agents. Then you have beads, which is a similar system, basically like a memory task management system, right? Where agents can decide on IDs and priorities. They store it all on Git, and it enables them to sort of like work together on longer term problems. I mentioned Ralph Wiggum's, and then at Factory we have something called missions, which is basically a long-term goal-directed mode where Droid can work for up to an unbounded amount of time. We've seen it work for 5+ days straight on a problem, typically larger enterprise migrations, modernizations, and it relies on similar techniques to things like Ralph Wiggum and beads, but it does that in a way that's a little bit more structured. And then, of course, you have things like Claude Teams. And that approach is a multi-agent approach in that Claude decides to create and spawn agents and then run them in parallel in order to solve a given problem. Um, we'll talk about the parallelization, the multi-agent coordination component in a bit. I think that it's actually very not intuitive. What is the correct way to solve most types of problem? But clearly, the mental model has shifted, right? Before you had this very interactive world where a lot of the tools were designed around a human back and forth. The human types the prompt, the AI does some tool calls, it writes a code snippet. Most people operate with these tools in like basically a form of um, you must approve every decision as they are made. And so you're sort of reading the code it generates, you're hitting accept, you're reading the next command, you're hitting accept. Um, and I think that in this world, AI can obviously be productive, but it is ultimately rate limited by the human being and the person and their involvement in the process. Now people understand there's a world where the human sort of defines a specification. Here's actually specifically what I want built. Here's how to validate it. Here's sort of the edge cases and the nuance. And then the agent decomposes that spec into tasks or into features or sub items. It works for potentially hours, days. Every time it hits a wall, it retries, it works its way around. It knows that it needs to solve and persist. And the human reviews at the end, right? So suddenly the human plus compute is able to do a much larger volume of work. And so it fundamentally changes sort of what the human's role is from the person driving the action to a supervisor. And so in this world where these things are changing quickly, what are we learning? What are the tricks that work and tricks that don't work as you're building these systems and as you're interacting with them, right? I think a lot of this comes from the lens of when you're using tools like Droid, but also when you're using Claude Code, et cetera. I think it all sort of follows. I think the first is that, and this is probably one of the most important lessons. Uh, the rich get richer, right? So teams that have great tests, clear docs, what we call high agent readiness. So those are basically introducing validation loops in your code base that agents can leverage in order to write code that more closely resembles and matches the quality of humans. When you have high agent readiness in your code bases, agents do a lot better. They are able to find this reward of signals like, yes, my code passes type check. Yes, it passes lint. Yes, it's structured the way you expect. And when a human reads it, they go, wow, that's pretty high quality code. Tools like Factory have built into our API agent readiness scanning, and we have built-in commands for Droid to actually automate scanning through hundreds of code bases, determining how agent ready your entire company is, and then giving you a roadmap that you can automatically remediate gaps in your agent readiness. There's also this world where I put it here as declarative beats imperative, but really you should be thinking about giving agents success criteria, not plans. And so like on Droid, we do specification mode, not planning mode. In specification mode, you build out a large specification and focus on the validation criteria that is required for the actual item, and you focus less on how to solve the problem, right? Because sort of telling the agent you should look at this file and you should look at that and then you should build this is actually like less intuitive than just sort of saying this is precisely what I want built. And so specification is really like a first class citizen with Droid. Um, so another big thing here is scope, right? I think that a lot of people have, and we can definitely talk about this a bit more, but like, what is sort of the impact on sort of work expectations and ROI? How does this change? I think what we're seeing internally at Factory is that we're not just moving faster, but we're also taking on larger ownership areas. And basically, like, what makes sense for one person to take on has rapidly expanded. And I think that teams also have a different ROI calculation. Um, you sort of have to justify, and I think a lot of people probably, if you're in this webinar, you've probably felt this, whether at work or with your co-founders or with your own engineers. But a 30-minute meeting is now enough time such that there's a real non-zero chance that if you had just set off an agent at the beginning of the meeting, you could have the answer to both questions that you cared about. Should we work on database A or database B? Should we figure out if prototype A works, or let's argue about whether or not, the button should be on the left or the right? Like, by the time that you have had that meeting, an agent could have actually implemented both sides of the problem that you're working on, and you'll be way faster, right? So suddenly it changes I'm seeing a lot of reactions. I think a lot of people probably have been feeling this recently. It really changes the calculation of what it means to build collaboratively with others. I think becoming prototype first, biasing towards action is super important at your organization, because really this like sort of like I think the Shopify CEO has a tweet, and I love using this example. Toby basically has this tweet where he goes, he's talking about, his doctor gave him some proprietary like USB stick that has like MRI data on it. And I guess he vibe coded basically an MRI reader, instead of waiting for a doctor. And let me officially state, I do not recommend vibe coding medical things for yourself. But that being said, he does it, and I think it's super cool because you can sort of see the MRI viewer, etc. And he has this comment that he makes about sort of reflexively reaching for AI anytime you have a problem. Like the moment you think, oh, I don't know if I can solve that, or there's some data that I want to understand, but I don't know where to find it. Like if you just immediately open up Droid or open up, Claude Code, etc., and your first thought is, let me just ask that question. Let me just figure out if I can answer that. Let me figure out if I can prototype that. If you reflexively reach towards AI, you will be much better off in this new world, because AI is rapidly increasing the what it can and can't be involved in. And then the last thing I'll say is just supervision as a skill, right? I think that there is some truth to the idea of managing many agents at once. I actually don't even think though that the optimal strategy, this is probably my hot take as someone who uses agents, droids literally every single day. It's not obvious to me that the best way to do that is to run 15 agents at once in parallel. I think that probably the overhead mentally of context switching between 2 to 3 ongoing sessions, is a lot. Um, and you can figure out other high leverage ways to bring like automations, for example, but you don't really need to supervise those. So I think supervision and understanding how to move between a couple of different sessions at once, how to separate concerns on your own computer. These are all things that, while the tools sort of make it easier to do this, you will probably have to sort of pick up, and fill a role as sort of being involved in that process. So I want to then talk a bit about what doesn't work, right? So I think that a lot of people right now understand that agents have limits. However, I think knowing what those limits are is super important, and sort of characterizing them in a way such that you can know what to look out for and, and where to see the failure cases. I think making wrong assumptions is a big one. Agents very clearly want to solve the problem on your behalf. That is a huge part of their post training, is they're told to be persistent. That is a part of what the harnesses are doing, like Droid, and Claude Code, all have a lot of heavy prompting to keep working towards the problem. And so making wrong assumptions is a big one. Overcomplicated code, right? Agents will overcomplicate your code. They'll turn a function that doesn't exist, I mean, sorry, that exists already in your code base and they'll duplicate it. Um, Side effect drift, where sometimes they change and remove comments. They will work on something slightly orthogonal, and sycophancy, where they don't really push back. We sometimes joke about this at Factory, but at the end of the day, like an AI just will not save you from a bad design decision. If you say, "I insist it must be done this way," it'll be difficult for an AI system to disagree with you. Um, and yes, this is I see these comments pulling up. I do generate my droids with presentations. I mean, sorry, I do generate my presentations with droids because I find it easier to communicate about the things that I care about by almost like voice noting to droid, and then I convert the voice note with droid into these presentations, which is my sort of workflow at this point. I want to put some concreteness on orchestration. There is fantastic research. I wish I could, maybe I can send a pointer or we can forward it into the thing later from Google that came out in January, where they actually tried to put like a real concrete set of evaluations on forms of agent orchestration. What are the different forms of agent orchestration? How do they impact quality? And I think that this is one of the most interesting outcomes. So for multi-agent systems that don't have any form of coordination, so effectively like parallel agents working on a problem, error amplification immediately becomes completely unwieldy. So if you were working on some task and your main goal is to have several agents just in the terminal working on the same task together, your odds of those agents making big mistakes are just so high. So it's very clear that even a skilled human is not doing it correctly if you have several agents up with no form of coordination, just running on the same problems at once. Um, Even when you centralize the orchestration, um, when you are running these things in parallel, it creates a huge validation bottleneck, right? Where you basically amplify the errors by the volume of parallel instances of the droid. There is an architecture that reduces this the most, and it probably resembles something like a central observer sending off these agents. Um, but I think that this is clearly actually like a very open problem in the research. We know one agent works. We have a sense that, some amount of parallel agents or manual coordinating or even you as a human, like when you work through a problem, you're sort of directing one continuous agent, but you might even clear the context, start a new session. It's serial but managed by you. If we want to get to some world where there's many agents working on our behalf, we really do need a better set of tools. We need to think through things like what is the global view of progress? How do we share context? Well, what are the task dependencies? How is memory going to be continued? And that sort of gets to this world where there's two specific kinds of multi-agent architectures that you can adopt today, right? I think that there's the operational multi-agent, which is sort of multiple agents where it's sort of how I've been characterizing it. Like you have multiple agents working on the same task, they have different roles, um, and the you have the organizational multi-agent, which is when agents are embedded across your entire SDLC and share context based on natural interactions and points that you might interact with them. So, for example, when you have your code review agent live in your source code manager, your release agent in your CI/CD pipeline, your coding agents live in your code. And so if you're able to access both of these multi-agent systems, you sort of have these like natural, almost human designated points where context can be handed off. And thanks to things like skills and plugins and MCP, as well as shared configs for these things, if your organization is sort of clever, you can make sure that every single agent that's being run at your company basically has has shared information. Um, yeah, for folks who don't know, Droid basically is a coding agent that is an enterprise-focused coding agent. And so what we built basically is a system that you know is able to work on high quality problems in a number of different environments. And it's adopted by a bunch of popular organizations, Adobe, EY, Writer, Grok, and some of the things that we can talk about at the end that make it focused on enterprise. I would say that one, we focus relentlessly on quality. We make sure that the agent is always operating and looking for validation. And most of our platform is actually built around agent readiness. So how you transform your org to adopt and measure these tools, and agent effectiveness. So basically how to understand how effective these agents were. Um, I'm just sort of reading these questions live as I go, so I'll try and address them while I also talk through. And so I think that one thing people have talked about is this idea of like Claude Teams. I think is a great example of a parallel agent architecture. So for folks who don't know, Claude Teams basically spins up a task list, sort of like beads, and then it spins up sub agents. And those sub agents it get sort of get names, and then they get the ability to send messages to each other. Um, and yeah, there's a bunch of concepts coming out right now that sort of rely on this parallelization. I think that there is a very open question still. These are very cool features, and I think if people have used them on certain types of tasks, they've probably seen some acceleration. But what's interesting is Google's research aligns with what a lot of our enterprise customers are seeing as well, which is if your task is inherently parallelizable, which is what you'll see in the demos of like, Claude Teams and a lot of other tasks, you'll definitely see a boost over a single agent, right? And so there's a big asterisk or caveat here of if the task is parallelizable, right? And so what does that mean? Well, think about like a research problem. How do you actually work through a complex research problem? Well, there are maybe 1 to 10 there are 1 to 10 uh, topics that you care about, and maybe you want to research some of these topics. And then you want to pull all that research together and you want to synthesize. Um, and that is a very inherently parallelizable task. You send off 10 agents, they go find some information, they come back and they say, here's the information that matters. And then the orchestrator says, let me write the document. Uh, if you think about like feature work or a modernization problem, let's say you have a code base that's written in Java 7 and you want to move it to Java 21. This is much less parallelizable, right? It is very difficult to know what the fifth step dependencies will be because you don't know what step one's outcome artifacts will be until you've actually gone into the code. If you've got 50,000 files or millions of lines of code, there is no real meaningful way for you to be able to predict the dependency chains, and it is an infinitely challenging problem to sort of predict out increasingly uncertain dependency chains, right? And so it turns out that on sequential tasks, or basically tasks that are inherently non-parallelizable, multi-agent very meaningfully degrades performance. And so I think that you guys can see this today on Claude Teams is like try to actually do any complex task with it. You're going to get code that's significantly larger, quite unwieldy, and very likely to have an issue with it compared to just sequentially working and iterating with Claude. And so there's almost some nuance of knowing when to use this sort of system and when not to. I think this is something that Factory is working on solving. We have a system called missions that actually forces sequential execution when sequential and parallelizable execution when parallelizable. But generally, I think that no one in the space really has like a very obvious solution to this. Because the reality is everyone wants to sort of see the fancy multi-agent system, but in reality, it just tends to not work well. Um, and so really the limiting factor here is less the agent itself. Um, and I think that this is a little bit asterisked of obviously we will build an agent that sort of has all this stuff built in and understands everything, is high quality and sort of can handle this all for you. But I think that the point that I'd like to make is that this is not something that you need to wait for, right? There is a path and a pattern that your company can take that allows you to enter into a self-reinforcing loop of velocity, right? And that pattern is quite simple. One, understand where your organization is in terms of agent readiness. What are your tests, your documentation, your patterns? How do you codify knowledge, and how do you provide validation loops for your agents? That's the thing that you should be focused on. Once you have high enough quality agent readiness, you can start implementing larger scale orchestration. So once you know the probability that any given task succeeds is pretty high, then you can start saying, well, let me run multiple tasks in parallel because I need to delegate and sort of manage them a little bit less. And thus you can move faster. And what I would recommend is if you think about basically gaps in your agent readiness as the bottleneck, then if you have somebody iterating on improving those gaps with agents, then you have a loop. Fix the issue with an agent, thus you can fix more issues with agents. Thus you can move even faster, right? And so your organization really right now, while the tools are being built and they're starting to get really good, I would highly recommend sort of investing in this so that when the agents are not just really good, but extremely good, you will be able to take advantage of the most advanced orchestration and management techniques. Without that quality, you're probably going to hit a bit of an issue. And this is sort of where I think people see they sort of get stuck. We see a lot of our enterprise customers, they have, they've adopted like a cursor and like 60% of the company moved on to cursor. Most still prefer their own IDEs. Now that you have the choice to stay with your IDE and use an agent like Droid or Claude Code, I think the idea of switching your whole IDE makes a little bit less sense. And I think that they feel like stuck because they're at like 1.5x. They saw a lot more code being generated. They're unsure if it translates to business value. This sort of feels where a lot of larger orgs are. Versus, I think if you're in this webinar or you've actually used these tools individually, in the back of your head, you're probably thinking, well, this is crazy. It's completely changed the way that everything works. Um, this disconnect is really because of that organizational overhead, right? Of trying to translate this into productive ROI, and agent readiness and orchestration is really that big gap. Um, and so I think that there's a lot of these open questions still about agents and what's going to happen. It's like sort of what is the ratio between the mean and the max of engineering productivity? Do we see a big gap? Do we see 10x engineers become 1,000x engineers? Is there really a way where some sort of superstar sitting with 15 terminals can sort of completely gap the productive expertise of others just using agents. Um, Another big question that we ask all the time at Factory is like, what's the role of being a generalist versus a specialist? I think a lot of what we do has blended between research engineering, front end, back end, working on specialized systems like terminal UIs, very fast, high performant memory systems. And we really see engineers doing all of these things together rather than specializing in just one. Um, a lot of people have joked about the idea of like coding becoming like a real-time strategy game like StarCraft or Factorio. I think that this view is like quite compelling. I don't know if it's necessarily exactly the right mental model for agents, but I think it is a compelling sort of reminder that the interfaces of today are going to change very drastically. And we have lessons that we can learn from systems that already dealt with like multiple agents and management of those systems, like StarCraft. And then the sort of, what's the ceiling? Like how much of when you have infinite code and systems that can write extremely high quality work at the moment that you can think it, where are the real bottlenecks in the product cycle, in the software development life cycle? Are most organizations today really bottlenecked by the fact that they can't write a bunch of code? I don't think that anyone here really thinks that. I think most know the bottlenecks exist outside of coding itself. And so, how can we work towards accelerating those bottlenecks with AI? Um, so, I see that there's a bunch of questions. So, I'm actually going to sort of walk backwards through those questions. And then, if I have time, I'd love to show you guys sort of an example of some of this stuff, but there's a lot of questions, so I think I want to make sure I answer those first. And you guys can go to for folks who want to try Droid, you can just go to Factory.AI and run this command. And I think that we also sent a promo code that has free tokens as well, so that folks can actually get started. So I'm going to
I
start
just
with
sent in
in
the chat. Sorry, I sent you in the chat a link. You can try it for yourself for 1 month for free with a token limit. The people that are here, they don't need 1 month for this token limit. One night is enough. I think it's 10
yeah.
million. 10 million. One night for 10 million is nice. And right, I follow the questions. There's not that many, and I am curious. And I also got in the private messages that people are really curious to see the product. Correct me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong. If you want to ask more questions, so ask them now because I don't see in the chat too much. I would love to see the product in action, to see the agents, maybe the difference between Cloud Code and others. Your
Yeah.
call. People feel free to send questions in the chat. We will decide what to do. Go ahead.
Yep, totally. I would be happy to do that. So the let me quickly respond to like two or three that I think are actually important framing for the product. And then happy to jump in and actually show it. So there was a couple of questions, for example, the first was what do you think about Vibe Kanban and BMAD? I think these are very similar spec-driven systems. Um, is there a kind of checklist of what an organization needs to have? For that, that's what I would highly recommend using and you can go to our docs for this. This is harder to show, but we have our agent readiness system, which is basically a dashboard that shows you in real time. Oh, I believe my screen might be paused here. I'm trying to pull this over into the Zoom. Here we go. I'm going to quickly share. Um, So here you can see our desktop app. And this is our agent readiness dashboard that actually you can track repositories and their level over time. And you can actually go in to an example and you have all of these different signals that you can use. And each one actually has sub signals available. And what this lets you do is it lets you track basically on a level of 1 to 5. Do I have all of the agent readiness signals that I could be using to make sure that agents are doing good work in my code base? For example, are there integration tests? Is there test isolation? Are there unit tests runnable? Are there feature flags? Release note automation? Cyclomatic complexity detectors? Pre-commit hooks? Code formatters? There are actually tons of these signals that a production code base needs. And then also some agent specific things like do you have agents.md? Do you have skills configured? Are documents fresh, right? So you can use this to actually understand what are my agents, is the quality present there to in order to execute. And then I see another question about the shift from foreground agent to background agent. I think this makes total sense. And actually, I should probably just keep keep sharing my screen of our desktop app because that shows you sort of the um So this is our desktop app. You can sort of see the ability to start new sessions. You can manage all your parallel sessions here. Um, and in particular, you can select from a number of frontier models, and you can also select cloud machines. And so I think that definitely the era of the cloud machine is here. But I will say a lot of people find it difficult to manage multiple cloud machines at once. I think that we make that a little bit easier, but I won't say that we have the perfect answer to this. And I think that the other thing I would recommend is I think most of the background agents are actually things like Droid supports something called Droid exec, which is a headless Droid format. I think a lot of other coding agents do as well. Running that in, for example, GitHub Actions is, I think, the most effective way to get background agents. And so you every time you have a code review, you want Droid to review on top of your PRs. That's sort of an example of a background agent, and it really is just as simple as putting it in your CI/CD system, right? Rather than needing to like spin up like an EC2 instance or sort of manage this. Um, and uh, and I think that the question of like what LLM model to use and sort of like what's available, we don't think that you should be rate limited by basically a single LLM system. You should be able to use the frontier LLMs at any given moment in time. Um, and so Droid is actually LLM agnostic underneath the hood. And we're still able to outperform the labs themselves even with their own models. This is, you can see even like on Terminal-Bench. So OpenAI released simple codecs, although that's not available to folks. It is like a simplified version of their harness. In terms of the harnesses that are actually available for daily use, the Droid is able to top Terminal-Bench in terms of quality for pretty much every model available. And so you get access to all these different systems. Now, in terms of the advantage of I'd say using factory, because I'm seeing a bunch of basically questions of like why use this over X or Y or ABC other system. I think that what most people are doing is they're realizing as an enterprise or a large organization, it doesn't really make sense to make an all-in bet on just Claude or just OpenAI. And then what you're looking for is a frontier coding agent. So you want a system that's able to do everything that it can do really well. When you want both of those things, Cursor tends to be not a great option in terms of a frontier agent, and so you're really left with a pretty small select group of systems. You guys can read our blog to read some of the research that we do on things like compaction, prompt caching, how we make sure the system is highly efficient. Um, and I think that then on top of that, our agent loop is actually like slightly different and tuned towards validation, where basically the system is able to uh, read through the like what you see with agent readiness, these validation systems, and leverage that in order to improve the quality of the code as it generates. And so uh, here you can see Droid in the terminal, which is probably like one of our more popular systems. And if you've ever used like a Claude Code, you should be familiar with a lot of the nice to haves. So you go in and you have things like MCP, skills, plugins. We support plugin marketplaces, and importantly, we support centralized configs at the org level. So you can actually manage and configure every aspect of Droid for your company from one central location. And you also have centralized audit logging, etc. And so when you start with Droid, you can configure what we call the autonomy level. So most tools basically give you like a either run the agent or run it with like dangerously skip all permissions. Droid has multiple autonomy levels that you can configure, which basically let you yeah, access I only want actions that are edits and read only to be run, but I want everything else to ask permission. Or I want reversible commands to be run, but anything else, ask me. Or I just want high autonomy where I can run all tasks. And so if I were to let me actually like run this, go into NovaFold and find me all information about that code base. So here's me just sort of like asking a question. You can see Opus running. It's going to start looking through, trying to search. I gave it a vague prompt, so it's like searching a bunch of different folders. Um, and then it's going to start running. I think actually Opus 4.6 to this morning has been having a bunch of issues. I don't know if anyone else has been seeing this. We've gotten like a bunch of bug reports. So I should probably actually run this with a model that is a little bit more uh, less controversial. So I'm gonna actually switch this to like a GPT 5.2 or maybe just the non-fast mode version. Continue. This is one of the cool things about Droid is that you're able to switch models live between Opus. And so, for example, you can actually run Opus as the spec mode model versus like Sonnet as the executor. Um, I think that one question that I'm getting is about the multi-agent orchestration. I would be happy to show you that as as this goes. So here you can see Droid is reading, it's listening directories. This should look familiar to anybody who's like used a coding agent before. Opus is basically just going through, it's listing a bunch of code, running Git, building a plan, and then executing on that in order to demonstrate it to the user. And for folks who want to work on this and they're thinking about migration, Droid natively supports every Claude code customization, and it one-click imports you to the .agents format. So converting Claude to agents.md. And so I'm getting a lot of questions about multi-agent orchestration. So I want to actually showcase that. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna just share.
While you're working, I will remind you because few people asked me. Yeah, we have 1 month free, and I sent the link in the chat. So if you missed it out, I said it before. We have 1 month free with Factory. It's not an ad. Go try, burn the Opus 4.6 fast if you don't do it in your Cloud Code subscription, and let us know, update in the community. We will also let knows what the opinion of our community about Factory. I don't know how much of you tried. I haven't tried, and I'm gonna import. By the way, if you're still working, I'm taking the time.
Yep.
I have some plugin I developed like methodology for Cloud Code, and I'm gonna test it out. If you say it's easy to import, let's see how it goes.
Yep, 100%. I think you guys should definitely give it a try. Give me a couple seconds so that I could
I'll talk.
uh
Don't worry. I will talk. Take your time. Just stop me when you're ready. So basically, also we're reaching almost the end of time. So let's take the time to say thank you to everyone joining. We hope you find value. Give me personally, if you need, or in the channel, in the community, a feedback. Nothing is perfect. Every time I say it, it cannot be perfect, and we can learn only if you let us know. Because if you say it only to yourself, we will not know and improve, and we want to improve. I think you're ready.
yep, 100%. So I think people were asking about orchestration. So this is a feature that we're going to be unfeature flagging for everybody very soon. Right now, this is an enterprise only feature, but we call them missions. And so what missions basically do is they let you basically manage much larger scale tasks. And so here, this is a mission, for example, that's been running that ran overnight. It right now has a couple of different workers on it. Actually, this is one that didn't run overnight, but it only ran for a bit. But basically, what this lets you do is it lets you manage a system that sets a huge number of tasks and features based on a spec, and then these specs summon and spawn individual workers that you can then monitor as you go. So if I were to click resume here, you can see continue. Um, you can sort of see this orchestrator session basically has the ability to access the system, and then it's able to start what we call a mission. And then that mission that you can monitor in here. So your individual workers will work on your behalf. It will work for some period of time until it completes its task. You sort of get like a summary log of work as it goes. And what we've seen is that this is especially useful in things like migration and modernization style problems where you are maybe working on just a very large body of work. And you want to understand basically how do I manage many systems to do this task for me on my behalf. And we also have this natively in our desktop with a UI that lets you actually manage all of this stuff, like sort of what I would say, quote unquote, real time with a missions view. So you have a bunch of different ways to interact with this system, but I think a lot of people are going to be quite excited for it. And so this is one example of orchestration. And the agents themselves, of course, can actually spawn sub-agents. So it's a semi-recursive system. But I'd say this is a more beta feature. So still working out the exact ideal way to manage these systems. But highly recommend anyway going to give Droid a try so that you can get access to it. And obviously we're great friends of the MongoDB folks. Droid runs some of our stuff on Mongo, and so it's been very cool to work with their team, and very grateful that to have this opportunity to sort of share a bit about sort of our view on the world, how agents are changing, and some of the systems involved in advancing the frontier of coding agents.
Thank you so much, We're right exactly on time. And of course, this is just a beginning. And I guess that if someone here wants to take it to the next step, oh, by the way, you didn't discuss about OpenClaw. So this is the opportunity to say, everyone, we have our community brain Rombot, and we will also upload to OpenClaw the recording. You can discuss with our Rombot about this session. And thank you so much, Um, we will keep you updated. How was it? And I remind you, 1 month for free with Factory AI, 10 million tokens, so it will be 1 or 2 days. And see you next time. Send me feedback. You're just starting your day, or just go back to bed. Go sleep another 2 hours. 10 is classic
Oh,
to wake up.
days started. I got more meetings. But I'm excited. So thanks everybody. This has been amazing. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen.
Bye, everyone. Yalla, pama, bye.